I Feel Beautiful, Part 2.
Everything all right, dear?
He heard Rarity call from the other side of the screen. I just never thought I'd get this far. His honesty notwithstanding, Thunderlane felt nervousness kill the rest of his words in his throat. A part of the screen folded back, and Rarity subtly peeked behind it, then walked up to him.
You mustn't be afraid, Thunderlane.
She spoke softly.
As I said, the place is closed for the night, and we're all alone. No one will intrude upon you. You're free to express yourself as you like.
She stepped backwards, back behind the screen.
Now, be who you are. Be bold, and be adventurous.
She finished with a leer, as she unfolded the screen before disappearing behind it.
And be gorgeous.
Thunderlane could feel his shaking hooves slowly steadying, and Rarity's words, reinforced by the quietude of the boutique, had a soothing effect. His heart slowed, his breathing quieted, and he felt the sensual excitement filling him up all over again. He looked down at the sparkling dress in his hooves, and felt as though the garment begged him to wear it. A thought that towed the line between exciting and tawdry. Thunderlane opened the skirt of the dress and eagerly slipped through it, feeling the slinky material caress his fur and feathers. When he poked his head through the neckline, the skirt reached his waist and his wings slipped out, eliciting a shudder with his mirth that traveled down his back into his backside. He did up the wrap-around bodice, fixing it to his neckline, and crossing two silky sheaths of cloth across his chest. It felt perfect, as though it molded onto his body naturally, like a second skin. He looked down onto his chest, then back to his wings, legs, and flank, and saw the tail hole in the back, depressingly unused. Even with that solitary flaw, he still looked, and felt, like the epitome of allure. He began, stopping after his voice cracked severely. After clearing his throat, he resumed. I'm ready. Magic clung onto the screen as it folded up on its own, and Thunderlane was shocked to see not Rarity, but himself. A streak-free mirror had been placed in front of him outside the screen, and Thunderlane saw a sparkly, feminine, and oddly alluring version of himself blushing back at him. His reflection's eyes were saucers, and his mouth dropped at the sight of his legs and neck, bared and beautifully framed by the shining golden fabric. He heard before a hoof pushed his jaw closed.
Falling in love, are we?
Oh! Thunderlane started, as Rarity eyed him with a dry grin.
Oh, darling, I don't blame you.
Rarity giggled.
You look positively stunning. A vision of feminine perfection. And there's no need to worry either. You're the same striking stallion that you were before, and you will continue to be. Make no mistake about it.
She faced the mirror with him, throwing a foreleg around his shoulders and smiling.
Well, how do you feel? Confident? Courageous? Liberated?
Well, he began, reaching for the words. I can't really tell. I mean, I've looked in mirrors before, but I never really got the chance to see all of me before. I'm not saying I don't feel anything, I don't know. Rarity placed a hoof to her chin and eyed him from snout to tail, until she seemed to realize that she couldn't see it.
Aha! This might help.
What might be— Oh! Thunderlane yelped as he felt an eerie sensation along the base of his back, just barely caressing his flank. A quick glance at the mirror saw that a blue haze had covered his backside, and a red haze had covered his face as a result.
1 second, dear. Don't be alarmed if you feel a slight pinch. Not that kind, of course, just...
And Thunderlane felt his legs squirm under his dress as he watched his tail slip out from the hole in the skirt of its own accord. Rarity's magic pulled his tail, doubled over, through the hole until the tip popped out, and it fell limp against the shimmering material as if to garnish it.
There!
Rarity announced.
Much better. Does that help, Thunderlane?
Still vividly blushing, Thunderlane surveyed his reflection, gave his hips a wiggle, and saw his tail swish around along with his dress. Just the motion sent a thrill through him unlike anything he'd ever felt before. Nothing he'd ever worn in the past, from pleated skirts to tight mini dresses, from ball gowns to negligees, had given him this much excitement just by moving. And seeing himself move intensified the feeling. Rarity wasn't entirely wrong in asking if he were falling in love. If it had been a mare looking back at him in that luxurious dress, shaking her tail for him, he may have just had fallen head over hooves.
I saw that look.
Thunderlane was snapped back to the present. What?
The look on your face.
Rarity repeated, with the same dry grin.
The thrill, the swell of the bosom, the rush of blood, the thumping of the heart. I remember the first time I wore a stunning head-turner number. I must say, I broke quite a few stallions' hearts that day.
Rarity gave an ecstatic giggle and approached, offering an encouraging huff.
Go on, display yourself.
Thunderlane didn't think a deeper shade of red was possible until seeing his face in the mirror after that. What?
Now! Whatever is the point of beautifying oneself if one isn't shameless about it?
She swept the mirror aside with her magic and walked across the room, a sassy shake in her bottom as she moved.
Throw your beauty around, redefine the sachet, spin on your own personal catwalk.
Rarity trotted back towards him, giving his flank another urging tap.
Flaunt, darling! Flaunt!
Thunderlane took a startled step forward and glanced at the shimmering pleats dancing coquettishly around his legs. His tail twitched slightly, displaying his excitement in part, and slowly he felt a barrier drop, like a confining medieval trap loosening from his body and shattering at his hooves. He felt the thrill burn in his chest, and no longer inhibited, allowing his tail another tingly twitch. This was it. The feeling he'd longed for since that first time feeling a skirt around his waist. The feeling he'd hoped for since that first time as a teen being caught and thoroughly spanked by his father had forced him to suppress this desire. The feeling that bubbled to the surface every time he'd see a mare's clothing catalog, seen mares walk past in new attire, or simply passed by the windows of the Carousel Boutique. The feeling of being able to look and feel sexy. The feeling of freedom. He took another step, his confidence now raging out of the gate, and took 2 more steps forward, giving his hips a shake with each step.
That's it!
Rarity cheered.
Keep it up, you lovely thing! Show them your feminine side!
Thunderlane felt another shiver of mirth as he sashayed to the far side of the store, stopping and turning like a professional supermodel.
Oh yes! Cross your legs, toss your mane, wiggle that cute little bum, be shamelessly sexy!
Rarity's cheers seemed to set a fire in his veins, and he stood up on his hind legs, spinning and feeling his dress fly up briefly. He stopped in a cross-legged come-hither stance and batted his eyelashes.
Oh, Thunderlane!
Rarity cried out in jubilation.
Simply marvelous! If there were a crowd, you would own them!
The fire in him warmed his face, and a girlish giggle escaped his lips. Thunderlane dropped back down to all fours and walked back to where he was, a much more pronounced swing in his hips now. The world around him was almost a complete haze. Only the lights and Rarity's sophisticated catcalls reached him now, empowering him and entrancing him. He stopped again, got up on 2 legs, and made another pronounced turn. His dress flew up again, a quick teasing display of his crossed legs, and an even quicker, even more tantalizing display of his cutie mark. He rested one foreleg on his waist, and raised the other front hoof to the side of his head, as he eyed Rarity with the same femme fatale as he gave his bottom another quick shake. The pleats danced lustfully around his legs. Rarity's eyes boggled.
Oh, you saucy little temptress! The stallions will fall to your hooves!
She froze, and the whole world seemed to freeze with her, come back in sharp, frightening reality. Thunderlane dropped back to all fours and sat down, a sudden parasitic self-awareness eating at his insides. The high was gone, and now the heat in his face was attributed to the debilitating humiliation of being a grown stallion in mare's clothing. Rarity looked back at him with what he was convinced was the same look that he had. Her face was vividly blushing as well.
Do forgive me, darling. I was simply caught in the moment. Just as you were. It just slipped my mind, just for that one small moment. I didn't mean... I was by no means insinuating that... Not that it's a bad thing, of course. I just...
Thunderlane tuned most of it out. This was the question that he'd never asked himself in years of covering up this pleasure or hobby or fetish or whatever it ought to be called. Now that those earlier words of Rarity's resounded in his head like a menacing echo in a haunted cave, the question had taken him up on a provocative offering from seconds earlier and slapped him painfully on his glittering backside. Am I... Does this mean I'm...
Now, Thunderlane.
Rarity spoke up, having approached him and settled a gentle hoof on his face.
I assure you, whatever you feel right now is perfectly normal. You're confused, you're not sure of what you were convinced of before, and there is absolutely nothing wrong with being mistaken in what you used to believe. You may feel one way, but suddenly something else makes much more sense. if you do feel that way, there is nothing wrong with it.
Thunderlane's head was turned to the side, staring at some random section of carpet, and Rarity gently guided his line of sight back to her.
Do you understand?
Her eyes seemed to glisten along to the desperation in her voice, and Thunderlane found his insides returning once again. The questions rebounded, though, and his eyes swiveled in his head as he struggled to answer them all. Do I like being a mare? Not just dressing like one. Was I supposed to be a mare? Or do I like stallions, or do I like mares? Does this mean I was anything else before? Does this suddenly change things now, or was I always this way? Is it right, or does it even matter? The one question that would not be silenced, even by the overlap of dozens of others, escaped his throat as he sat. His dress pooled beneath him like a golden puddle. What am I? His sight trickled back to the floor, and he visibly cringed as he barely saw his leg under the skirt of the dress. It felt so alien, so wrong, as though any second now Princess Celestia herself would break down Rarity's door and sentence him to life in prison for defying his gender norms. Rarity's hoof left his face, and her foreleg slid around his shoulders. Her other hoof pressed gently against his chest, and the wraparound bodice of the dress forcing a reprise of the alien feeling.
What do you think you are?
She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Thunderlane drew a blank, but struggled to answer anyway. At first, his mouth hung open without a sound, and after a few seconds, a dumbfounded scoff came out. He spoke at last. I'm a boy who likes wearing dresses. But that sounds like I should be, or should have been, a girl. He turned back to Rarity and searched her face for help. Should I be?
It's not a question of what should be,
Rarity replied, her voice still low.
It's a question of how you feel.
She pulled him in close and began rubbing his back.
So, how do you feel?
Again, nothing came to mind right away, but Thunderlane tried anyway. Another weak scoff, and his eyes landed once again on the dress puddled around him. I look like an idiot.
Absolutely not,
Rarity said sternly.
You look divine, but that wasn't what I asked you.
The hoof that wasn't caressing his back now found his face once again, guiding his eyes back to hers.
How do you feel?
The first thing that came to mind was, I don't know. But Thunderlane stopped just before he opened his mouth as he caught himself in the mirror Rarity had set aside earlier. The way his dress seemed to glide over his body, even as it lay with him on the floor, still had an air of class and beauty. The string neckline, the material framing his bare back, the whole displaying his tail, it twitched after he just laid his eyes on it, and the pleats shimmering and catching the light. It gave him his answer. He wasn't sure how he looked, but he certainly knew how he felt. I feel beautiful.
And that's all that matters, darling.
Watching only the mirror, Thunderlane still jumped when Rarity leaped into him and wrapped her forelegs around him. He leaned forward and gave in to the embrace, even returning it after a moment. The flowery scent of Rarity's mane brought him comfort, and the warmth of her fur against him seemed to shield him, if only for that moment, from the evils of the world. Acceptance. Sweet, blissful acceptance. He'd realized at that moment that he'd been afraid ever since that day as a 14-year-old walking around with his father's red hoofprints on his behind. Acceptance was out of reach then. And I've been afraid to look for it ever since. The hug lasted a few more seconds before Rarity released him. Still sitting on the floor, Thunderlane suddenly felt pierced by the silence of the boutique. He felt a sigh escape his throat, and with it, the sense of burden. He felt lighter, stronger, like he could finally walk upright again after a lifetime of being weighed down into a crouch. He chucked himself into the mirror again and remembered how enthralled he'd been by his reflection. And now, for the first time, his looks and his feelings matched.
Thunderlane?
Rarity asked.
Is there anything else you'd like to talk about?
Thunderlane pulled himself away from the mirror. Oh, well, I'm not sure. I mean, there's a lot I want to talk about, but not now. He felt his tail give another thrilling twitch, and the churning warmth in his stomach, spreading below the waist, returned. Maybe when I'm ready, he mumbled, feeling the warmth spread over his face as well.
Because, you know...
Rarity cooed, touching her hoof to his shoulder.
You can talk to me about anything, darling. Whatever's bothering you, I'm here for you.
Thunderlane looked up at Rarity's warm smile. Really?
Of course. I have gotten very good at that lately, you know. Helping stallions express themselves and such of the like. I find self-expression intimately important in every pony's lives, especially for the gentle colts. Besides, you're on a very rocky journey right now. And if I can make anything easier, I will.
She chuckled as she continued.
Even if it's just by helping you find a skirt that best shows off your lovely legs.
Thunderlane felt his blush sweep over his face once again, then glanced down back at his legs. I guess they are kinda nice, he muttered. He felt his tail twitch again, and the blush deepened.
Well, they would be in a smooth gown,
Rarity suddenly trilled.
Now stand up straight, dear. If you sit there any longer, you'll wrinkle the poor thing.
Thunderlane jumped to his hooves, and Rarity began trotting through the store, whipping clothes off the shelves and racks with her magic, and moving them around.
Oh, darling, the possibilities! You'd be exploring so much of yourself, and I'd get to test my mettle on a new subject. Dresses for stallions. Oh, the mere thought of what we could do just gives me shivers.
Rarity,
Adjusting for waist and chest size, options for leggings and shoes, perhaps even wigs to round out the ensemble. Oh, it's gonna be so exciting.
Rarity, I don't think...
Perhaps less light coloring, preserving masculinity and displaying femininity at the same time. Perhaps some jewelry, fewer frills and bows. Oh, Thunderlane, the path we could pave for stallions everywhere would be a joy and a triumph.
Rarity! Rarity froze, and the 24 garments that she had been floating into the air all around her froze with her. She stared at Thunderlane after he spoke over her, and almost indignant shock. I'm sorry, he said, his voice back to an inch above a whisper. I can't even go outside in this yet. No pony else knows about this, and I'm still trying to figure out who I am and what I want. He rubbed his shoulder with his other forehoof and rubbed his back legs together beneath his dress, the ever-present blush burning his face. Like I said, whenever I'm ready. Rarity gaped at him for a few seconds, then her face softened. The clothes in the air flew back to their respective places, and the store was neat and orderly once more. She walked up to him and stroked his face again.
I understand, darling,
she said.
This is new for you, and I wouldn't do anything if it made you uncomfortable with your feelings.
Thank you, Rarity, Thunderlane replied, still whispering and still blushing. And also, could you not tell any pony?
Say no more, dear. Fashionista client privilege.
She winked at him, as if to seal the deal. Thunderlane giggled effeminately, but the businesslike nature of Rarity's words soon triggered a reality check. Oh, that reminds me. How much do I owe you for the, dress? Rarity merely shook her head and smiled.
Complimentary.
What? No, I could never...
You can, and you shall, Thunderlane. It's the least I could do, especially after making you think I'd turn you away. I should at least make up for that.
Thunderlane stared wide-eyed at Rarity for a good few seconds, as another emotional wave threatened to eclipse him. Rarity, you really are generous. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Anything for my bravest customer.
She leaned forward and kissed him on the cheek. Being brave really does get you places. Never be afraid to do anything. Unless it was life-threatening or something, but you know what I mean. Now, let's get on to those gorgeous donators. Top donators, Dash of Evergreen, J Tinman, and Darkside. Peter Coulthard, dospo, RuneScythe 9852, CourierCruz CI, Delta Omega, Ryanny Dragonwolf, Secret Moon, Tallrascha, The Toilet Snake, Soul Dragon, Starlight Glimmer, Squiddy Boy, Gaggy, David D. Sanchez, Trey, Shadow Drake, Joe Piercy, Alex F., Rainbow Dash, Teal K. Anderson, and TV Killer. Thank you all very much for watching this video, and live life to the fullest.